You can change the look, feel, and the general behavior of DataLink by going into the settings option. So I would highly recommend this for anybody who, well, for example, if you've gone from the previous versions to the current version and you just like to go back to how things used to be. This is a place where you can do some of that. So let's just go through this from top to bottom. We have, first of all, within settings, the choice of what your default is going to be when it comes to pasting the results of a tag search into your spreadsheet. As you can see, by default, it's in a column. So for example, if I were to do a tag search using this tag search right here, and let me just reset this and I'll search for all the tags that begin with the letters CD. Okay, there's a set of tags. When I click on OK, as you can see, we paste these into a row, or excuse me, into a column. Well, notice that's something that can be changed. You can specify in a row instead of in a column, and then it's going to end up being pasted over left or right. Actually, that's a new option you'll find within tag search. One of the options within tag search is you can specify, is it going to be in a row or a column? So what we're doing here is we're specifying the default. As you can see, you can always override that default if you choose to. In the next setting, we determine whether a server name is going to be copied into the spreadsheet when you do a tag search. So the end result of that is you're just going to see the server name next to the tag name if you choose that. Now this use Pi server time zone is going to indicate whether we're using the local time or the server time as the time zone when you specify specific times. 7 a.m. depends on what time zone you use, so that allows you to toggle that. Now the next item is this display NA instead of blanks. What this does is it specifies the behavior when you've got a function like this in which, well, for example, if I were to change this function here so that we're looking at a different interval of time, instead of 24-hour period, let me just change this to a 12-hour period, and you'll notice that this array here, even though it doesn't automatically change size, it will show some blanks. So if I say from yesterday plus 7 hours to yesterday plus, let's go with 15 hours, that's actually just an 8-hour. If you notice, now we're showing nothing. Now you can toggle that by going in here and say display NA instead of blanks. Let me go ahead and change this, y plus t plus 7 hours. I'll change this to y plus 15 hours. You'll notice now, as opposed to what we saw before, now we're actually inserting the indicator, this NA, for to indicate that there's data that's missing from this. Now there's another setting here that's very similar to that. It's this disable resize to show all values message. Now I will go ahead and show you what happens when you get that message. Normally that happens when you, again, change some attribute, either the tag name or the timestamp, some argument of a function in a way that increases the results that you would get into that same array. See, this array here that we're seeing here, this array doesn't change in size when we recalculate. So if I were to change this, let's say instead of from y plus 7 hours to y plus 15 hours, I go from y plus 7 hours to the current time, well, that's actually going to return 32 values, but there is not enough room to show 32 values because of the original size of the array. And there's workarounds to this. You can choose to resize this array. It's going to go ahead and actually resize it for me. But this setting is all about whether we show this message or not. Some people want to show it, some people don't want to show it. So let me show you before and after. If I go back to, let's go to t plus 7 hours. This was the original size of the array. And if I go into my settings now, and I turn this on, disable resize to show all values message, now if I were to change this to give me those 32 results, as you can see, we can't really tell that not all the data is there. That's actually something that you, well, give some consideration to that, because you don't necessarily want people to think they're looking at the whole set of data, but in fact they're missing data. Now you may wonder, why would you ever not want to show this? Well, the reason that we support this feature, this setting here, is to preserve compatibility with earlier versions. It used to be that we would not show that message, so in case you would like to continue that behavior, we've supported that. But yeah, we recommend that you do not check that, so that you do show people when there is some kind of a change that needs to be recognized. Now, the next setting I want to go through is this locale independent. This gives you the option to force the DataLink to interpret timestamps using only pi time syntax, the time syntax you see here, ignoring any of the regional settings you may have, the Windows settings. So in that timestamp format is going to be either using these abbreviations here or the day, month, hour, or excuse me, day, month, year, hour, minute, second format that's standard with pi syntax. So if you want to essentially lock out people from using any other time syntax, you can use that. For those of you who like the previous behavior of DataLink, in which we did not automatically display this task pane when you clicked on a cell, this is a great option for you. Let me demonstrate. I'll go ahead and accept the default. And if let's close this pane out and show you the behavior. This is the current behavior, the current design of DataLink. When you select a function or a cell that has a function from DataLink, we bring that task pane up. That's a new feature. Some people don't like that feature. So if you want to disable that, you can just choose this option right here. And now, as you click around, that behavior is no longer the default. Next up, we have these two functions right here, these two options right here. They control the format of the numbers and the format of the times that are going to be returned by DataLink. So for example, these are the times returned by DataLink. As you can see, we are sticking to the standard pi format, day, month, year, hour, minute, second, as you can see right here. But you can control what that output is. You can also control what the default output of the number format is. So for example, if I wanted just 2 decimal places, I could do that. If I wanted, let's say, leading, using commas, etc., I could do that. So all the typical number formatting that is available within Excel, these are the options that you have available to you. The default here is general, which is going to match whatever your general settings are in Excel. Now finally, we have this section here called Automatic Update. Automatic Update controls the behavior of a feature we haven't really looked at yet. It's this toggle switch that you see right up here. This toggle switch, and I'll go ahead and click it to toggle it to on, forces now an update to the pi data. So the data is going to update, based on whatever settings you put in the settings option. So if we look over here, we can see this interval is equal to 5 seconds. Well, that is determined by whatever you chose here in your settings. Now, it's not entirely intuitive how to interpret this, so let's go over this in some detail. First of all, let's understand what the difference between calculate and full calculate is with regard to automatic update. First of all, this does not control at all what the F9 and what the Control-Alt-Shift-F9 do. That's not what this is trying to set here. What this is doing is determining which of the two types of calculations we are going to execute during an automatic update. Are we going to do just a simple calculate? And during a simple calculate, what we will do is we will recalculate all of those volatile fields. The volatile fields would be those fields like the current value field, and also if you've got any time functions in Excel like now, those will recalculate. Those are considered volatile because whenever you do a normal F9 in Excel, a recalculate, those things recalculate. With a full calculate, then functions like this one right here, pi arcval, functions that don't normally recalculate when you simply do an F9 or change a cell in Excel, then those will recalculate for you as well. So a full calculate will notice, or I should say will observe, that this timestamp here, D14, this timestamp right here, that even though that has not changed, that we will go ahead and reevaluate this expression even though that timestamp hasn't changed and none of the other inputs have changed. So when we go into settings here, if that full calculate is chosen as the automatic update calculate, then every time the automatic update triggers, we will do a full calculate, including those things that are not normally updated when you simply change a cell. Those would be the so-called non-volatile functions, the functions that are not automatically updating, every time you change the cell. Now, to state this another way, let's go back to our other example here. Here's an example in which, let's say when we originally did this, we had y plus 7 hours to t plus 7 hours. There we go. That's from yesterday to today. Okay. This is a non-volatile field. When I update this spreadsheet by pressing F9 or just by editing a cell, this function does not automatically recalculate. As you can see, if I double click on this, you can see this function does take these two cells as their start time and end time. And because those two cells, they're not based on some kind of a, for example, an Excel function like now, which will automatically update every time I press F9. Even though these are not based on one of those volatile functions, when you do a full calculate, this will go ahead and recalculate this function right here. Now that brings us to this last field here in the automatic update, and that's the interval in seconds. And normally this is going to be a number that has to be greater than 5. The least amount that we can do the auto update in is 5 seconds. And that's going to be the interval at which we automatically do an update. So for example, if I were to choose 30 seconds, that means once every 30 seconds we will do whichever update you choose, a calculate or a full calculate. Now what happens when we put a 0? When we put a 0, this is identified as auto. Does that mean we do a non-stop recalculate? Well, that wouldn't be supportable. No, what we do instead is we do either 5 seconds or whatever is twice the duration it takes to normally do the recalculation. Let me go over that again. Let's say that it takes 10 seconds to fully recalculate your spreadsheet. Well, if it takes 10 seconds, and we will monitor that as we do this recalculation. If it takes 10 seconds to do a full recalculation, then if you set this to 0, it's effectively setting this to 20 seconds. Because what we want is we want at least 50% of the time for your spreadsheet to be responsive. Now, we either use that, or if it only takes, say, a split second to recalculate, we'll just use this as 5 seconds, or we will use the minimum. So it's either going to be 5 seconds or twice the duration it normally takes to recalculate, and that's what you'll get if you enter 0. Now, as you might guess, all of these things are documented in great detail in the DataLink manual. So if you are not familiar with where to find that, simply go to techsupport.osisoft.com. Under Download Center, you want to choose Documentation, User Manuals, and then you use the drop-down list box there to find the user manual for PyDataLink. So I'm going to go ahead and choose under Products, I'll choose PyDataLink, and for the user manuals we can choose, well, I'll choose all versions. So here's where you would select it, then you would choose Download. Now you may be prompted for your username and password for your tech support account when you go here. Now I'd like to wrap up this discussion by pointing out just a couple of other things that we find useful to point out at this point. First of all, there's a nice help file that you'll find available on the ribbon. Choose Help, and this is where you're going to find a lot of good advice about just about everything that we're going to be talking about in this class. And if you haven't seen it, when you hover your cursor, you'll get a nice little tooltip that explains what that particular option is. Another thing that may not be obvious, do you see how some of these functions have a little triangle there? Little triangle, if you click on it, it's going to give you an option to do one of, some of the things that we think are some of the, I guess, the most common things people want to see. So for example, all the hourly values for yesterday, I'll go ahead and just click on that. All I have to do now is type the name of the tag, press return, and there's the result. So it gives you a type of a, kind of one-stop shopping to very quickly generate something you might be interested in. So we've tried to come up with some common values.